stars, I will be there.
I'm Monica Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear. Little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
This episode is a reminder that grief does not have a finish line. 18 years after losing her daughter Heather to brain cancer, Holly Caron shows us what enduring love looks like. Quiet, honest, and deeply present. This conversation affirms what so many families live, but rarely hear acknowledged. Grief has no expiration date. Love does not fade with time, and neither does the bond between a mother and her child. Today, Colby and I are honored to hold the light with Holly Caron. I'm so grateful you're willing to share what it's been like to carry your daughter Heather with you for the last 18 years, Holly.
Thank you, Monica. I appreciate that.
18 years, though, gosh, for a parent, that's an eternity. I've shared before that a fellow grieving mother whose daughter died 10 years before Cassidy told me that I was so early in my grief, and I looked at her wondering how she had ever survived that long. And yet here we are. Does it seem possible that you have lived 18 years without Heather, or does it seem even longer?
Well, I feel like my journey really started the day she became ill and got diagnosed. So I in my mind, I'm 20 years on a grief journey. My grief journey started the day Heather was diagnosed with cancer, and I try not to count the years now. I know in my mind like what the years are, but I think I've gotten further along where I don't keep track of years.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's too cumbersome to always be planning the next anniversary. How many years? How many years? How many years? So I've kind of let that go a little bit after probably in the last 3 or 4 years.
Oh, it's so interesting to learn that. You're going to find that I am fascinated because I feel like I'm the mother who says to you, I can't believe you've survived this long. So that's how I'm going to be probably during this podcast, is because I'm in awe that you're still here.
Yes, and I'm here and I'm strong today.
Well, I want to learn so much more about your story of courage. But first, Heather, she was so much more than her cancer diagnosis. And I want to give you the opportunity to tell us about her. Who was she as a person?
Heather was vivacious. She was brave, strong. Growing up, Heather had a spirit that was hard to quell sometimes, I can say honestly. She was very athletic, and when she learned to play hockey, that was really the start of her passion for sports and skating. And she wouldn't just do a sport, she would take it on full tilt. She wouldn't play on one hockey team, she'd play on 3 hockey teams, and then she would become a hockey ref. And when she wasn't playing hockey, she was reffing hockey, going to hockey camp. I mean, she couldn't get enough of it. She was that girl. She had a lot of energy, and was proud to be that person. And she also was very individual. She wasn't a follower. She had a deep love for her cousins. She grew up in a family with a large group of cousins, and they were close. They all lived in the same town, went to the same schools, and they had a very tight bond, and considered Heather to be quite the comedian in the group and a lot of fun. But I think the thing I miss about Heather is just her self-assuredness and her independence. She could take on the world. She was fearless in so many ways. I always love the example of when rollerblades were really popular in the late 90s and the early 2000s. She's the only one I know that bought a pair of rollerblades with no brakes on them. Because being a hockey player, I mean, that's just an example of how are you going to stop, Heather? How are you going to stop on those rollerblades? And, she was just fearless in her life. She said, it's okay, Mom, it's okay. Her high school years were really special for us. We became extremely close during her high school years. There's a 6-year age difference between Heather and her sister, Katie. So my husband, Ray, was dealing with a lot of stuff going on with Katie, and I was the one always closest with Heather doing her activities because you kind of have to split it up. but she had a zest for life that I haven't seen in many children in my life.
She sounds like such a joy.
She was wonderful. She was high spirited, but could do anything and could do it on her own. She would get in the car and go on an 8-hour car drive without telling anyone. She just didn't have any fear in her life, and she was very close. We were really, really close. I love this analogy that comes to mind sometimes. When Heather went to college at the University of Southern Maine, she invited me to come. I would go visit her a lot, but she invited me to come to school, not only come to school, but go to classes with her. She said, "Can you come to some of my classes? I want you to meet some of my professors." And she just wanted me to do everything with her, And when Katie went to school many years later, I don't even think she wanted me to step foot on campus. It was like like, leave me alone. I'm all set. I don't need my mother here. They were very different, and our relationships were very different because of that. You could have two children from the same parents, or whatever, and they're very different, in how they go through life. But I think if I ever ask my nieces and nephews, who are all grown adults now, I think that about Heather is the one thing they remember most is how fun she was and how vivacious she was, but how brave she was. I think that's the word I use to describe Heather the most. Gutsy. She was a gutsy girl.
Ironic that she would end up having a brain tumor because she probably had to be very brave.
I don't think she ever thought that the brain tumor would put her down, would stop her from doing all the things she wanted to do. So she was diagnosed her senior year in college. Actually, the irony of it is she got diagnosed while she was playing ice hockey in a tournament. And she called and told me she couldn't see the puck on the ice. She couldn't follow the puck on the ice. It was a Sunday, and I suggested, why don't you go to the emergency room? And they told her to follow up with an eye doctor. And through that process, we found out she had a brain tumor. So in a matter of 4 days, we went from I'm skating my heart out to now I have a very large brain tumor, and it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, how did you and your family cope during that time? Because you didn't actually live close to her. She didn't move home, right?
She never moved home. We always said that we would maintain her apartment in Portland, even if she couldn't work. Heather often would have 2 or 3 jobs and go to school full time. She just was that girl that could do it all, And when she got diagnosed, when she finally met with the doctor, the neurosurgeon who was going to care for her, he told Heather, "You're going to have to quit school and you have to quit your jobs." And she was a bartender at Sable Oaks Golf Course in Portland, and she loved that job. She got to drive the cart around the course and sell the alcohol. Well, she made so much money in tips, and she loved it. And I remember driving up to the golf course with her and how hard it was for her to go in there and tell them that she had to quit the job. It was September, and it was almost the end of the season. And then at the same time, she worked at Home Depot, and she had to go over there and tell them she had to quit her job. But the one thing Heather wouldn't do is quit school. She said, "I'm not quitting school." And she tried to take her courses, and she dropped 2 courses, but she kept taking 3 others through this big ordeal. And she did end up getting her degree. It took her another year instead of for her last semester, but she did end up pushing through.
And your other daughter was in high school, right?
Yes, when Heather got diagnosed with cancer, Katie was starting her sophomore year of high school. And so that was, at that point, I had to focus a lot of energy on Heather and her illness, a lot of travel time away from the home. But having a strong husband and somebody that's on board for whatever we need to do, and family members, we managed to work our way through that illness, letting Katie enjoy what she should be doing in high school. Obviously, it put a huge damper on anything Katie was doing in high school because she had a terminally ill sister. We thought Heather would beat it, just because we just kind of thought she would beat it. She did have some periods during this illness where she was well. She was able to live on her own. She could still drive, even though she couldn't see well. She insisted on driving. There were some times where everything was okay. It might be 3 or 4 months at a time where we may have recovered from the surgery, and then Heather went back to doing her life, and she was able to function, not at the same level. I mean, walking was hard. Different things became difficult, but she still did it. And she had friends down there, a network of school classmates and her professors. She was really good friends with a couple of them. So she pushed through.
Perseverance.
She was tough.
Tell us about the last days with Heather. What do you remember most about that time, Holly?
Finally, her oncologist at Dana-Farber told me that they weren't going to treat Heather any longer. And at that time, I had to share that with Heather. Relatives were driving to Boston, and the doctor told us, the neurosurgeon told us that she wasn't going to make it out of the hospital. And so they even did an operation right in the ICU. It's horrible if you think back on it. And she came out of it during that time, and we ended up going back home. There had been a lot of damage and radiation to Heather's brain, so she began to have some short-term memory loss. So the point of me telling you that is that even if I told her that she wasn't having treatment anymore, she couldn't remember that. So she would keep asking me, what are we doing next? Like, when do I go back to Dana-Farber? And when am I going to see Dr. Drapatz? And what are we doing? She couldn't remember that we were done treatment. So one of the things I did is I didn't talk about it a lot. I just said, we're just going to get you stronger at home, and then we're going to see what the next steps are. And anyone who's witnessed a person in their family dying from cancer, it's a tough death to witness for like a 23-year-old, almost 24-year-old. To go through that is kind of a starvation death. It's pretty ugly to watch it. She was home with us for 17 days from the day they stopped treating her at the hospital. And during that time, we had the most wonderful hospice team come in here and to our home and help us every step of the way. We had a chaplain, a social worker, we had a care aide, and a wonderful nurse. And they got me through it. I had such peace, which sounds so hard to believe, but I was at peace with the whole thing. I wasn't angry. I was devastatingly sad, but I knew Heather couldn't fight this disease anymore. And I knew what I cared about was how her journey went from that point forward. I knew she was going to die. I wasn't hoping for her to hold on any longer than she did. I was hoping for it to end for her. And the last couple of days, I witnessed some pretty remarkable things happen to Heather. And she was very much unconscious most of the time, but she did have an opportunity to tell me that she had seen my grandmother, and that my grandmother, my Sittu, that's Lebanese for grandmother, had made her a cake. Now, Heather loved cake her whole life. It was kind of a joke in our family how much she loved cake. And she told me that she asked her sister to get her shoes because she was going to go with my grandmother. And Katie said, I'll come with you. And she said, no, Katie, you're not going. And she's whispering it because she can barely talk. That's how weak she is. And she also had times where I would go into her room and her hands would be up in the air. She was pretty much unconscious, but she had skylights in that room, and she was holding her arms up towards the skylights. And I knew in my heart that she was going, and that my family members that had passed before were coming for her. And the day she died, she had kept her eyes open all day and was looking out a window. I mean, she was just so drawn to the light. It was February, so it was very much like today, the light. And I just can remember sitting there all day and just wondering what it was, what she was going through. And she passed in the middle of the night around 3:00 in the morning. I just have to say I was very at peace with it. I knew her journey was done. Her cancer journey was done. And I knew she couldn't beat it. And I wanted the suffering. The suffering is the hardest part to watch. If anyone who's witnessed somebody die of cancer, the last days are very, very hard to witness. It's different when it's your child and not an elderly parent or somebody who might be at that point in their life where that's a normal turn of events to pass away if you're 80-something years old. But when it's somebody that's 23, a few days before her 24th birthday, it's not the normal routine for people. And it's a lot of people I've spoken to had shocking events, as you did. and they lost their child in a different way. So my shocking event happened when Heather got diagnosed, and I did a lot of grieving during her illness. So I think my journey was different in that way.
We've had other parents share that too, who've had children who were diagnosed with cancer, that they felt their grief journey started the moment they heard that they were going to be facing this together. We met up before this podcast just to get to know each other, and you shared the most amazing story to me about Heather's body being cremated and that you wanted to keep her remains at home, but you shared with me that changed after a conversation with someone in your family. Can you tell us about that?
Heather's was a girl that loved to surf. Not a lot of people in Maine surf, but she used to surf at Higgins Beach, and they loved to go in February because that's when the waves were big at Higgins Beach. And she had to wear this whole getup. This wetsuit was from head to toe, feet, hands, everything. That's just Heather in a nutshell. That sums up her whole, not afraid of that at all, not afraid to get cold or anything, you know. So when she passed, my intention was I had her ashes put in this container. It was like a biodegradable container. And my intention was to take that to Higgins Beach and send it off into the water. And that was how I was going to like release her spirit. And I had this whole idea. So I got this beautiful container and I brought it home. And a few years later, I never did it because I couldn't let go of her ashes. I just emotionally, I couldn't do it. I couldn't put her ashes in that cold water. I thought I could do it. You always hear how people have these wonderful moments where they can share ashes and do these ceremonial goodbyes, but I wasn't able to let go of the ashes. So one day, I'm very close to my father, who's 93 right now, but one day my dad came over and he told me, he said, Holly, I want you to put Heather in the cemetery. I can't talk to Heather. I can't visit Heather. I'm not going to come over here in your bedroom and talk to Heather. I'm just not going to do that. And I never really thought I would put Heather in the cemetery. I don't know. I just always thought I would have her ashes. But the more I thought about it, I thought, what will Heather's ashes, will that be a burden for Katie for the rest of her life? If something should happen to me, is Katie now going to be responsible for carrying ashes with her through her whole life? And then what happens with the ashes? Do my grandkids have to carry these ashes? And I really had a long thought about it. So I agreed to do that. I agreed to do the cemetery plot. And I think it was 5 years after Heather died that we finally got it set up in the cemetery. And I had a ceremony, just my daughter Katie and my husband and my mom and dad, just us and the priest. And we went to the cemetery and we had a little ceremony and we buried Heather. And I know my dad goes there a lot because he has a lot of relatives that are in that cemetery, and he goes and visits Heather a lot because if I ever do go there and plant flowers, he's the one that takes care of them. But I don't enjoy the cemetery. I don't like to go to the cemetery, and I don't feel Heather's at the cemetery. But it has given other people the opportunity. I've had relatives, and Heather has had relatives that lived out of state come and visit the plot. I've gone there before and found roses there, and I know other people in my family visit the plot.
So how do you feel about that decision now?
I'm really happy I did it, but I'm really also glad that I waited until I was ready to do it. I don't think I could have made that decision. I think all of these decisions are very difficult. When I was working in hospice, one of the things we talk about is the actual idea of, can you imagine you have to make a decision about what you're going to do with your daughter's body? That's a tough decision to make for any parent. What's going to become of that body? And I always had these feelings of, is she going to lay in the cold ground? You have all these weird feelings come to you like, what are you going to do with her body? And wow, that's a really tough issue to tackle.
I've often said to people, you spend more time planning a wedding than you do a funeral. You're forced to make all these decisions within 5 to 7 days.
Yeah, it happens very quickly. And the other thing is I really am very close to my father, and I did feel like I wanted to do it for him. I did feel that he was so close to Heather, and he spent a lot of time with her when she was ill because he was retired. He still jokes about it today. She would call and be like, hey, what are we going to do today? And he'd be like, God, how many times can we go to Martin's, Heather? Or something funny. And how many times can we go out to lunch? But, we laugh about it now. But I think I'm so glad I did it for him.
So much of what we hear about grief focuses on the beginning. And I'd love to spend some time talking about what grief looks like years later, when the world assumes you're okay now and you've moved on. But let's remind everyone that grief has no timeline. What does that mean to you? What does that phrase mean to you?
It's a roller coaster for me now. I have a lot of times where I'm at peace with this situation of not having Heather in my life. And then there's times where my grief is so heavy it feels like I'm carrying a backpack of rocks on my back. As other people have said, it does feel like that. And I don't think people give you the space when you're this further along. They expect you to be over this shock of it and the hurt. I've been able to now tell people when I need space. I've been able to say, I'm not good company today. I want to be alone. And you have to accept that. I can't be something I'm not today. And I'll have times where I can't stop crying. It happened to me recently. I went to Hannaford, something triggered me, and I couldn't stop crying in Hannaford, and I had to leave and go home. But I will say I have a lot of good days. I have a lot of great memories of Heather that I am able to, think about that help me along the way. I think what's hard at this point, having recently gone through the holidays, is other people aren't talking about Heather. We just had a big family gathering, and nobody mentioned Heather there, I don't think. And it's a busy family. It's a big family. There's 35 people there and a lot of little kids, and they're opening gifts and having fun. And my grandkids are right in the thick of it. And I think it's normal for nobody to talk about Heather, except I just wish somebody would have mentioned Heather's name there. I wish one of my nephews, somebody would have come up to me and said, geez, we're really missing Heather today. Maybe about the first, maybe 8 years, maybe 6 to 8 years, when we had this family party, we would light candles and we would talk about Heather. Have people would talk about other people that died. But I think as we had got a lot of little kids in our family, we kind of stopped doing that because the party's more about them. The chaos is more about the little kids. After the holidays, one of my nephews reached out to me, and I couldn't be more pleased, and said he wants to have, we used to have the bracelets, the rubber bracelets with Heather's name on them and a little saying. We probably haven't had them for 10 years, but he asked me if it was okay if he ordered some for everybody. I was totally surprised, and I was so pleased that he wanted to do that. He said, I need to get that bracelet back on my wrist. I want that on my wrist again. And I was just so touched by that. That meant more to me than anyone can imagine. Just one person saying that to me. It doesn't mean that any of them have forgotten Heather. And they were a very tight bunch growing up. They were all teenagers at the same time, and they were very, very close. And they haven't forgotten Heather. They're doing what they're supposed to do when they're 38 or 40 years old. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing in their lives.
Mom was telling me when we were discussing this podcast that Katie has had children since, and I was curious how she's chosen to educate her kids or celebrate Heather's life with her kids, or what that looks like for her, because as somebody was in a similar position, I was in high school and I lost my sister. There was a lot of anxiety around wow, now I'm kind of alone. I'm stuck with my parents. I don't have that support system of somebody who is in the same situation I am. And then also they're never going to have, an aunt. They're never going to have if I have kids one day, they're never going to have Aunt Cassidy. And how do I communicate them her legacy and the reason why we still celebrate her?
I won't speak for Heather, but I will tell you that from the day my kids were able to walk and talk, we've always talked about Heather. We've always spoken about Heather. Sometimes they call her Aunt Heather, but usually just Heather. Well, of course, Colby, there's a lot of pictures in my house of Heather. And I've always told them the truth. I said, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Mallory's 8 now and Charlie's 5. And Mallory talks about Heather all the time. I'll show her photo books. I'll show her Maybe we're down in the cellar and I'll be like, oh, this was Heather's when she was your age. Or let's look at Heather's report card and we'll joke around about it. I feel like Katie's going to manage that in her own way. I do sometimes worry that it's hard for Katie now to be an only child. Sometimes I've said that to other people in my family that, Katie is the one that's going to have to, be with us through the end here and the journey that we go through. And I think she's good with that. She has a strong husband, and I can't speak for her how it is with her. Katie's not one that wants to share it a lot. We don't sit down and have long heart-to-heart talks about it. I did some hospice work with children after Heather died. So I was very familiar with talking about grief and death with kids. So when these kids came along, I was never going to sugarcoat it. I was straightforward, honest from the day they could walk and talk. This is Aunt Heather. Aunt Heather died. She got sick. And, I wasn't afraid to tell Mallory, even now she'll talk to me about it, that Heather got cancer. And sometimes people don't live when they get an illness. I feel like it's my job to keep Heather in the forefront with my grandkids. And that's what I do. They'll always know Heather and know about her. Actually, my granddaughter Mallory's a lot like Heather. She's a little feisty, and she reminds me so much of Heather. It's just really fun to watch. I don't think Katie would call it fun, but when you can be the grandmother, it's kind of fun to watch her grow up.
I think children are very resilient to grief. I've always said that. To some extent, I'm fortunate that I was 15 when Cassidy passed, because when you're 30, 40, 50, just the way that grief can hit you is so different. But also, Katie had to go through the process of not only seeing her sister die, but how that was affecting her parents throughout treatment. She had to also bear witness to how difficult and shocking that process can be as somebody becomes that sick from cancer. And so I can imagine that her grief compounded pretty heavily for a long time, and I absolutely don't think there's any right way to grieve. So I'm glad that you're still able, though, to celebrate Heather with your grandkids, and that's okay. It doesn't always have to be necessarily Katie.
I don't really know if Katie has a big strategy at home or what she's doing, but it's like Heather's just part of our family. We talk about her all the time, and I have beautiful photos of her on the wall, and I just think Mallory, it's like she's not afraid of it. I don't want my kids to be afraid of death, or not to know that death happens. I feel like when I was younger, death was a little scary, and having worked with a lot of children through hospice, I feel like a lot of people don't talk about death or don't educate children about death. And so for them, it's this big, scary thing that happens. And so when my grandkids came along, I was very comfortable telling them what death was and that people do die.
You found great purpose in working with hospice. You've mentioned that a couple of times. So can you tell us about that and what that's been like for you?
Sure. After Heather passed and my hospice team left, it was kind of sad. I was here all alone. And a couple of months later, I got a nice letter in the mail saying that hospice in Waterville offered bereavement services, which I was not aware of that. How would I know? And so I decided to go and meet with somebody there. And my husband and I joined a grieving parents group. And we knew a lot of people in the group. Even the person leading the group, her husband worked with my husband. And through that, we took 2 or 3 sessions of that, and it helped us so much. I probably say it saved us going to that group. We could talk to those people about things we wouldn't say to anybody else, anyone in our family or anything. And we could just share so much. And I loved the organization, and I became so comfortable there, and I wanted to give back. I wanted to take the training and become a hospice facilitator. So I did that, and I became a facilitator for grieving children first. And I had the pleasure of I did many years of working with the program they had at Hospice Volunteers in Waterville, where we would have groups of children come in, age 3 to 5, 6 to 9, and then teen group. And I mostly worked with the 6 to 9-year-olds and the teens. And it was probably the right thing for me to do at the right time. It was so healing for me, being able to help these children. And they get so much out of it. And I just have to reward the caregivers or parents that bring the kids to these groups for having the foresight to do that. And after I did a lot with the children, we had a lot of Kobe volunteers come in, students, and they were, I don't know if they were doing it for credit, but we had a lot of volunteers to work with the children then. And the Kobe students were just so great with them. So I moved on to doing the grieving parents group. And that's really where I spent a lot of my energy on working with facilitating grieving parent groups. And I really found that I didn't realize that I had something to offer people that were in my position just a few short years ago, starting out with their journey. I became a board member, and I did that for 6 years. And I also went around and did some speaking for fundraising and whatnot for the organization. So as much as I tried to help other people, I was really selfishly kind of helping myself do all that. Spending all that time at hospice was so great. And to all the services they had at the time and the events, the people, the music, just the whole hospitality of hospice was just really wonderful and something I really, really needed. It helped me out. I can't even tell you how much that organization helped me with my grief. That was where I found my peace, was at hospice.
I'm curious too, because I just mentioned it earlier, and I spoke almost purely anecdotally for myself, but have you noticed that there's large differences between the way that kids grieve versus adults, and how those, different populations sometimes cope with these sorts of events?
One thing I'll say, Kobe, for sure is we tackle some tough issues in my 69-year-old group. I remember I would ask them, what was it like at the funeral? And a lot of the kids weren't allowed to go to the funeral, and they didn't know what the funeral was. So I tell them what a funeral was. They didn't even know what a funeral was. And then some kids, the younger age kids, we always had it was kind of like a branch off a tree, but we called it our tree. And we had they would go at the end of the session and they would tie a bow on there with a piece of yarn and share a memory with us. And a lot of the kids couldn't cope with the person they were really there who died. So they would always revert back to a pet that died. That was very interesting to me. They would try to be something that was easier for them to talk about. And a lot of the activities we did, I think, were very focused on them just being able to get their feelings out. And it's amazing how much people leave children out of the loop, not intentionally. But if a child has a grandparent die unexpectedly, the people handling that death are not prepared to yet sit down and explain to the child, this is what death is, this is what's going on. So coming to a hospice where you're in a group with 8 other kids that are also experiencing a death was probably so good for the kids. And they don't come in there and sit there and act like little angels. They're full of it, and they're running around, and they're writing on the wall, and they're doing this, but we had a routine every session, and we had I made it like we had a format every time we got together, and it was probably the most insightful thing I've ever experienced with children, because I think in this particular area of our lives we do leave children out so much. They don't, and just some of the experiences that they shared with me was just blew me away. I had one little boy, he was so adorable. He was like maybe 6 years old, and he was high energy, but his dad had died, and he was just devastated that his father died. And when he would go to the memory tree, he would make up these fantastical memories about his dad, how him and his dad built a Cadillac, and they went into the garage. He had all these big visions of what him and his dad did, and it was so wonderful. And I think maybe other people might have corrected him and said, no, you didn't do that with your dad, but no, never us. We would always let him just go on and applaud him for sharing such a great memory. I think that it was just such a great experience in my life. Very healing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes, like you said, by not involving kids through this process, you miss out on the wisdom that they can teach us through just their pure expression through this. They don't have context to understand what they should or shouldn't say, and they just experience it how they do, and that's something that I think a lot of us sometimes as we age, we sort of consider like, well, I can't cry here because this isn't the right space, or I shouldn't say this, or, it's not wrong to be fantastical and have an imagination and write a story. Yeah, I've always felt that.
And a lot of the kids would say to me, Kobe, that I don't cry at home because I don't want to upset my mother, or I
Mm-hmm.
don't dare to cry at home. That we would talk about that, like, where's a safe space for you to, or they would say that a lot, like, I don't want anyone to get upset. I don't want my people, my grandparent, my grandmother to cry. She got in my bed and cried one night, or, I don't want to make her cry. So they're holding it in. They're always holding it in. And I think that's true of a lot of people, not just kids, that we are trying to find the right time to share our grief. We're holding it in until it just comes out, and I feel like if children have a space where they can share their grief or what's going on, it's good for them to get that out, and not maybe with the certain people that are so grieving they can't share it at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Challenging.
Yeah, certainly.
Holly, something that took me almost a decade to understand is that joy does not erase your grief. It honors it. And I'm curious to know, how did you honor your grief and welcome the joy back into your life 18 years later?
That's a tough one, isn't it, Monica?
It is.
I remember the first time you could probably relate. The first time you felt joy, you almost felt guilty. You had this moment
Very.
of, oh wait, that did I just enjoy that, or did I just have a belly laugh? Did I just let go? Um,
Completely understand that. How can I be happy? My daughter's not living.
yeah, I must, or if we went somewhere and had a great time, and I would have tremendous feelings about that, like that was so wrong, or that's not how I'm supposed to feel. That's not how I feel. It was really interesting, I think, for a lot of people after when they're in the grieving journey to find joy again. Um, but I have to say, it comes from within. People can't really give it to you, and it comes from within, and it only comes from within. I think when you find peace with what's happened in your life, you really have to be able to come to grips with the tragedy, the trauma, and maybe the post-trauma feelings that you have before you can let yourself be joyful again. We still can feel, even at this point, almost 18 years in, next month will be 18 years, I still sometimes have a great time, and then it'll always. One time somebody said to me, you have a coach on one shoulder and a critic on the other. And so sometimes if I'm having a really good time, and then sometimes I'll start to get some weird feelings and then I remember, I said, that's my critic talking to me. My coach on the other shoulder is telling me, go for it, make yourself, enjoy yourself. It's okay.
Can
Release,
totally relate.
yeah, release those feelings and enjoy what's happening in the moment.
Well, we want to tap into your wisdom and your experience. What have you learned about grief that might be helpful to others?
One thing I want to say about this subject in particular is when you began your grief journey, or when you're in that grief space, sometimes it's hard to remember that people around you are also grieving. Your grief feels so big. I have a sister I'm very close to, and at one point, I remember she said to me, oh, this was maybe a year after Heather died, or 2 years or something, and she said, I'm really having a hard time going to work. I was surprised, and I said, what's going on? And she said, well, because Heather died. And I don't think I realized how much pain some of the people around me were in. Like, even her aunts and uncles. And I felt, am I being selfish in my grief? Like, I felt, I feel like I didn't give space for people around me. I was so self-centered in my grief that I wasn't even thinking about anyone around me. I didn't have the ability to really at first, but it's taken me a long time to learn that you're not alone in your grief journey. Other people are grieving too. And it's okay to share it and to tell people when you're grieving, and it's okay to talk about it.
I wanted to say, too, that I still, after 11 years, I still have moments of disbelief. Like, does that ever go away?
I don't feel that way. I don't have moments of disbelief. I don't know, because I think our tragedies are so different. I think where Heather had an illness, and then where you had a traumatic event. I think it's just very different.
What would you say to a newly bereaved mother who fears that the pain that she's experiencing right now will never soften?
I would tell her to give herself some grace, to go ahead and feel the feelings you're feeling, and that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not doing anything wrong, and that you need to share it with the people you love. You don't have to hold your grief alone by yourself. You're not on an island. And the people around you, you know what? They want to help you. They want to be there for you and they want to help you. And when we close up, I think that was the hard part for me. I felt like I would just close the door and just say, I don't come near me. I don't want to be around people. That's how I react with things. But I think had I early on, had I opened the door more and let more people in, I think I might have handled things differently. Maybe it would have been less painful for me. It's easy to shut ourselves down and isolate ourselves. That's the tendency. You can almost be embarrassed by how hard the grief is. You can almost feel that nobody understands, but maybe we haven't given them a chance to understand. And it's one thing that I think my husband has always kind of said along the way is, if you don't tell me, I can't help you. And I think it's so true, because I'm the type of person that will just bottle it up because I don't want to share it with people, or I don't want to burden people. But I feel like if you, number one, give yourself space, allow yourself the time you need to grieve. And number two, if you share it, I think people so want to help people that are in our situations. They want to find the one thing they can do to help you. And if it's just to sit down and be there for them, have a cup of coffee, share a moment, call up, see how you're doing. They want to do that. Your friends and family feel so helpless, and they want to do that. They want to show up for you. And you have to let them. I think I was the kind of person that didn't want that. I didn't let people in initially.
I think in doing so, too, you also educate them about the grief journey you're on.
I highly recommend that if people want to go to a group, that it's very helpful. Had one parent, she had lost her son, and she brought her child to the Grieving Children's program, and then she would sit in her car, and while they were doing Grieving Children, we would have a group for those parents. They may have lost a partner, or it was general grief kind of group. And I went out in the car one time and I said, why don't you come in? Why don't you come in and sit with us? And she says, I just can't do it. I can't do it. And I said, oh, just come in, and please join us. And I knew her before that. And she did come in, and by the end of that session, she was talking so much. She was letting so much out. I thought, I'm so glad I encouraged her to come in, because she was holding it all tight. You feel tight, like you're just holding it in as hard as you can.
Well, we're grateful that people like you exist. Before we end our conversation, as we always do, and I feel like you've done such a great job sharing who Heather was, but how would you like us to remember your daughter?
I think the people that remember Heather just remember that she had a very positive aura, and she had a strong energy about her. She was strong through her whole illness. She never showed weakness. And I remember when we might get bad news, and she might be coming out of a dreadful brain surgery, and I'd be in the room crying, and she'd be like, Mom, please don't cry. Like, she'd make a joke about it. Are you crying again? Like, she was trying to comfort me. She was that girl. She was just really super special. And we had her for 23 years, almost 24 years. And I think she left an impact, a short life that she left an impact on the world. And I think that every life has meaning and impact on a lot of people.
Well, it's very clear that Heather is still very deeply loved. And what you've shared today reminds us that grief doesn't end. It changes.
It changes.
Yeah. It softens in some places and surprises us in others, and stays close in ways we don't even expect. And that's not a failure of healing. It's a reflection of enduring love.
Thank you, Monica, for saying that. That's so true.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity to say her name with you. And
thank you.
reminding us that love does not expire.
It does not.
Thanks, Holly.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kobe.
as long as you love.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as